Hello and welcome to Pehchan. We have a very special guest with us today, a Pakistani Mamdani or Jersey City's answer to Zoran Mamdani. We have Mussab Ali with us today, who is a young Pakistani American running for mayor of Jersey City, also against a disgraced former governor with a sex scandal. Musab just has one of the most remarkable backstories that I've heard of any Pakistani Americans in public office. He is a cancer survivor. He immigrated with his family when he was age 3 from Pakistan. His father used to work at the Newark airport. He had a job on 9/11, and he didn't have a job the day after because he got ethnically profiled. He is active in the community, was at this even before Mamdani. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have him is, one of the objectives of this podcast is to create 100 Zoran Mamdanis by 2030 from within the Pakistani American community. But when you hear Musab's story, I think what we're actually trying to do is create 100 Mussab Alis, because he is Pakistani American and he brings so much to the table. Musab, thank you so much for making time for us. We'd love to just begin by hearing a little bit about your story, why you're running for mayor, and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Bilal. Thank you for having me. It's fascinating. I was doing a talk show in Urdu, like a morning TV show or something, where we were talking a lot about Pakistani identity. They were making me do it like half Urdu, half English. So I don't think I was able to get.
You can roll either way. We do both, so like our audience can understand both English and Urdu, whatever you're more comfortable in.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Is like I think I was able. I like let the people down in Urdu and did a lot better in English. So look, I think you covered a lot of the big details here. My family moved. I was born in Lahore, Pakistan, and I moved here when I was 3 years old, in September of 2000. And as immigrants, my parents were just looking for whatever job they could find. Back in Pakistan, actually, my dad worked for WAPDA, so he was like big engineer, like felt like he had one of the few jobs that was considered like prestigious within the country. And my mom actually was a university professor of physics. So these were people who had like, in terms of Pakistan, kind of made it, right? And they'd started very much
Mm-hmm.
in the lower class and sort of like were stable middle class people, but sort of sacrificed that dream to say to themselves, you know what, like want to see what America can offer for our children, right? Sort of like had this perspective
Mm-hmm.
that was very long term. And so we come here, and their jobs completely transformed. My mom, her first job was working at a daycare, right? So imagine university professor to like daycare, totally different kind of
Mm-hmm.
perspective. And my father, I remember his first job actually, I think was working at like Hudson News. So you remember
Mm-hmm.
that like 7-Eleven Hudson News kind of deal. And so then he gets a job at Newark Airport and sort of like thinks like, all right, this is my big break, like sort of have an opportunity to, eventually hop back into the engineering side of things. And when 9/11 happens, 9/11, he has a job, and September 12th, they tell him to go back home and sort of like, submit a background check that's never going to come back. And so he loses his
Mm-hmm.
job. But my parents have always been like very dedicated to service. I think like I give a lot of credit to the way that I operate based on like how they've lived their lives. My dad has always been working for other people and like trying to think about how he can give back, and like even within his family is extremely generous. My mom is like, part teacher, part social worker, community liaison, therapist, like, all like I grew up in my life kind of having people call my mom and just asking for advice. Like that's just who she was,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I always had this like sort of service mindset, but wasn't necessarily like thinking about public service in the like political landscape. And the reality is like I grew up in a world where I didn't have any of those people to look at, right? I mean, Zoran is fantastic. We love Zoran. But in 2016, when I first ran for office, I mean, this is before, I think even people Zoran was working with were elected. So
Mm-hmm.
2016, when I ran, I mean, this is pre Ilhan, pre Rashida in terms of the national stage. And I ran mostly because one, I saw the sort of gap that exists in the education system, but two, like, when Trump was running for office, he has a quote directly about Jersey City. And he says, I
Mm-hmm.
remember watching in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands of Muslims was celebrating during 9/11. And to me, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, you get this hometown pride, right? Like I grew up in a place that was extremely diverse. It's the home of Ellis Island. And now suddenly there's a guy running for president who was criticizing my hometown. And so I decided,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you know what, I'm going to do something in response. I run for office. mostly because I didn't know any politicians. Otherwise, I probably would have worked the campaign. And
Mm-hmm.
I lose that night, and Trump wins. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, all right, I'm a teenager, and you can imagine my self-esteem sort of getting crushed, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, okay, my city hates me, and this country hates me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so 2017, get elected, and sort of this really uphill battle. It was a race that no one thought we could win. Honestly, in hindsight, if I had actually if I had been an objective person, I would have been like, "There's no reason to run to this race. Like, we are not going to
Mm-hmm.
win," but we did, right? We won
Mm-hmm.
9,388 to 9,320. Get elected, sort of changed the trajectory of my life.
Wow, that's an incredible story and arc, and there's so much sort of in there. I do want to, for a minute, focus on the race today before we go back and sort of unpack some of the layers here. Why are you running for mayor today? What's driving you to run for mayor of Jersey City?
Yeah, so that was basically part one of the story. Now we can get to part two. I mean, look, I think right now Jersey City has become increasingly unaffordable, and sort of this American dream my parents realized I don't think is possible for many people today. And I have a great sense of responsibility that I feel. Right, I sort of feel this debt towards my city, and the reason is because get elected when I was 20, and we made history. We're the youngest person ever elected, the first Muslim ever elected, the youngest Muslim elected in the country. And to put into context, right? So I'm elected at 20. The next person, the person whose record I broke, they were elected to office when they were 26. All right. So that was the youngest
Mm-hmm.
elected official prior to me. By the time I was 23, I was the president of the Board of Education. So they'd write another headline. They're like, oh, this guy made history again, right? Like now he's a board president
Mm-hmm.
at 23 years old. And my colleagues, right, were, very sort of receptive because they were like, look, this is a guy who can get the job done. I'm also admitted to Harvard Law School at the same time, right? So I started my first semester of law school. And so I have this sort of glowing resume. I mean, you think about that story, right? Like here's a
Mm-hmm.
23-year-old who's the president of his school board in the middle of the pandemic. Like his colleagues trust him. He's at Harvard Law School, right? Had just won a bunch of scholarships. Like people are like, wow, like this guy's going to do something. And then two
Mm-hmm.
weeks into that term, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So it's kind of like this crazy experience. And I sort of looked and I was sort of reflecting of what is it that I want to do in my life? And I was like, you know what? Like, alhamdulillah, I'm happy with public service. Like if I get a second chance, I want to continue to do public service. And the
Mm-hmm.
big thing about that too was that the people of Jersey City had my back. And that's such a
Mm-hmm.
big deal because again, I built this reputation. And I remember honestly, I remember having one of my really close friends and having this conversation about when I was going to reveal the cancer diagnosis, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we didn't reveal it initially because I didn't know the prognosis and didn't know how things were going to go. I didn't know how I was going to feel. But it starts to become clear that I'm going to lose all my hair, that people are going to know very openly. Like we're on TV
Mm-hmm.
talking about reopening the schools all the time. And I remember having this fear and having this conversation of man, I've always built up myself as the guy with no flaws, right? No errors, kind
Mm-hmm.
of always does it. And now for the
Mm-hmm.
first time, I have this massive chink in my armor that I can't control, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
practicing Muslim, I don't smoke, I don't drink. There's no history of cancer in my family. And so this
Mm-hmm.
happening was so out of nowhere. And
Mm-hmm.
the people of Jersey City responded in a way that I honestly I don't know if I can ever
Mm-hmm.
repay this debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Extreme levels of support, people just praying for me in churches that I didn't have never even gone to, people sending
Mm-hmm.
food to our house, people just making me feel loved. And so
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was like, look, man, I got to come back and I got to fight for these people. And so when I graduated from law school, I started doing voting rights work, and I look at Jersey City and I'm realizing man, the people who had my back can't even afford to be here anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Forget the story of owning a home like my parents were able to do. They can't even afford the rent. And so I
Mm-hmm.
said, you know what, this is a moment to step up, step up with some really radical ideas of how to make the city more affordable. And so that's sort of been the thesis of this campaign from the beginning. And it's been really fun to see Zoran's campaign because we actually launched our campaign before he did. So you can watch our
Mm-hmm.
launch video
Yeah.
back in April of 2024, where we literally say what my parents were able to achieve. I see that not being possible for the people here. And I think Zoran has sort of elevated us to the next level. I mean, the video quality, the way that he talks about things. I mean, we just, it's a pleasure to be able to watch him and sort of be in this ecosystem with him, sort of watching what he's been able to do.
That's incredible. And to your point, you were, the trajectory of your career, sort of in public service, and what you've done, and how young you started out. One of the things that I'm very curious about is how your Pakistani identity sort of plays into all of this. Are you sort of an Obama-esque figure where you're like, hey, I'm a competent and the right man for this job, and I happen to be black? In that case, like, is that how you talk about your identity, or do you wear it on your sleeve? Is it an asset or a liability? Talk to us about how your Pakistani identity plays into your public service and how you think about it in that context.
Huh, it's interesting. I think about it more as like, you know, I'm very proud of my culture. Like my mom, I mean, she dresses like a Pakistani auntie, right? Like my mom even goes to school wearing like a kurta, right? Like to
Hmm.
me, I've never. It's fascinating. I've never been ashamed of who I am because of Jersey City,
Hmm.
right? Like one of the most diverse cities
Hmm.
in America, and so like if I'm walking down the street in Shalvar Kameez,
Hmm.
okay, people are just like, all right, that's normal,
Hmm.
like that's the thing that people do
Hmm.
here.
Hmm.
And I don't know, man. I think that Pakistanis, in a lot of ways, what's been really tough on the political side is that we just have not had a lot of political success in this country, right? I mean, I've
Hmm.
actually, I've gone on my way to like meet Pakistani elected officials. And when I started in this
Hmm.
game, there were very few of us. There were probably like 10 of us in the whole country.
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
now, like there's so few Pakistani elected officials, and so I've gone on my way to like try to build relationships, talk to them, meet with them, interact with them, because I do think there is this sense among Pakistanis of like looking at our brothers and sisters from India and saying, "Wow, like Indian American community,
Hmm.
this cycle had a presidential candidate on one side,
Hmm.
right, and on the other
Hmm.
side, like had someone running for president who is in line to be the next governor of Ohio." So,
Hmm.
on both parties, like the Indian community has
Hmm.
been extremely successful to the point of like having
Hmm.
people run for president, having people take it very
Hmm.
seriously.
Hmm.
And the imagination here of like, there a Pakistani has not been in Congress yet,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so it's like,
Why do you think that is?
well, I just think like we sometimes get in our own way. I mean, you
Hmm.
look at our country. I mean, like Pakistan in its history has never had a prime minister finish a term. You're either
Hmm.
assassinated or you're overthrown. There's a military coup, right?
Hmm.
Like it's just
Hmm.
that's the nature of our
Yeah.
country, unfortunately. And so I think we get in our way. And I think there's also a sensibility within our community where we don't necessarily line up behind one another, right? Like,
Hmm.
I noticed this. I'll be honest. My first election in
Hmm.
2016, I mean, I don't think a lot of people support me at all. But even in
Hmm.
2017, I don't know that my community, the Pakistanis specifically, were like gun ho about having my back,
Hmm.
right? And I don't think it was
Wow.
until 2018 when I was after I was elected when they were like, oh yeah, like we got to
Hmm.
defend it. This is our guy, right? Like this is our guy. We got
Hmm.
to have his back. But
Hmm.
even now, running for mayor, right? Like within the
Hmm.
Pakistani American community, like I look, there are some people even within my own neighborhoods who put up
Hmm.
signs for my opponents, and it's tough, right?
Wow.
Like because
Hmm.
to me, like yeah, you can disagree with me on policy, and like maybe there's a
Hmm.
policy proposal that someone else has that I don't have, but
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like it's more in nature of there's this sort of like why is he the person who is stepping,
Hmm.
right? And so there's
Hmm.
this emphasis of like, oh, like, what has he ever done for us? Like, why
Yeah.
is it that this person or this person's son, right? Like, and I think that
Hmm.
that's sort of like a natural part of our community, which is built into like a
Hmm.
tribalism and caste system that like,
Yeah.
I actually was never even exposed to as a kid. To be honest with you, right? Like,
Hmm.
I didn't even understand that Pakistanis had castes until I was probably in my 20s, right? Like
Yeah.
that concept to me was so foreign. Like my parents never even talked about caste. And so to grow older and to understand like wait, within our communities like there's all this sort of unlearning that needs to happen. I think that's been like a huge barrier to our success.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. And although I'm not surprised at a number of levels, and I'm really sorry that you had to go through something like this, and part of the reason why this podcast exists is to change the paradigm for our community. But it's also true, and it needs to be acknowledged, and we need to get over that to be able to do the kind of things, for example, that the Indian American community is doing. On the flip side, I want to ask, if there is a flip side, has, as you've become more prominent, as the cause of having more representation has become more prominent and important, has the community rallied now? Or for example, when you go for fundraising, does the Pakistani American audience or the Muslim American audience feel like a natural sort of community that you can go to as a home or as somebody who comes to support you? And how do you pitch to them? And because this audience is also sort of part of the Pakistani American community, part of the Muslim American community, like, what's your pitch to them and how do they react when they hear that kind of a pitch?
I mean, I will say, listen, I think a lot of our donors are Pakistani and are Muslim. So it's not to say that as a whole, like we can't do it. I just think that we need more people who are like willing to embrace the idea of like,
Hmm.
taking these risks, right? Of like,
Hmm.
look, like, running for public office is a risky endeavor. I mean, there's
Hmm.
always complications around like, all right, like what is this person's reputation? Like, what are their odds of
Hmm.
winning? What is the, what
Hmm.
does the calculus sort of look like? But I
Hmm.
do think a lot of people have been very supportive in this idea that like, yeah, we have someone who's standing up, who's fighting for what we believe in. And I think
Hmm.
more than that, even if you don't believe what I believe, right? And we have a
Hmm.
whole host of progressive policies and a vision of like
Yeah.
affordability, even if that's not the case, at least there's someone in office who has sort of like a shared lived experience with you. And so,
Hmm.
I sometimes tell voters, I'm like, listen, like, I can't actually dictate to you how I'm going to react to issues that are going to happen 3 years in the future. Because the
Hmm.
reality is, like, whatever policy proposal I put up today, right? Like 3 years ago,
Hmm.
if someone was talking to us about, AI and like policies around
Hmm.
AI, you'd be like, what are you talking about, right? Like AI is so
Hmm.
sort of primitive in what they're able to do.
Hmm.
So 3 years from now, like I'm going to be voting on measures that like, we can't even determine right now.
Yeah.
But what you should
Hmm.
have faith in and trust in is
Hmm.
that I am the kind of
Hmm.
person with the kind of values that you trust to be a
Hmm.
leader. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of shared values come from a lot of shared experiences, right? So like being a
Hmm.
son of immigrants, right? Like being here in this
Hmm.
country and sort of, growing up in a certain community in a different household and a certain understanding of the world. I think that's been really positive. And so I do think there's lots of Pakistanis and there's lots of Muslims who have said, you know what, like, listen, this is someone that we want to get behind, that this is someone we want to support, that this is someone we want to see in office. And I think that's been really encouraging, honestly.
That's really fascinating to hear. And I think the other angle there is, the mayor of Jersey City role is also a springboard to, we've seen governors of New Jersey come from sort of mayors of Jersey City, and then governors of New Jersey go on to play influential roles within sort of national politics as well. And sort of, it's upwards from there. And to your point earlier, we don't have a Pakistani American congressperson. And, that's also something that is sort of a conversation that is alive. Now, in the interest of inspiring 100 more Mussab Alis, what does your day to day look like? When you're running for office, like, describe to me what a typical day in your life looks like.
I'm not sure this is going to be inspiring. More so than it's going to be like sort of setting a bar pretty high. Look, I'll be honest. Look, I'm somebody when I decide to do something, like I go all in, right? I'm like, look, this is our focus. This is what we're going to do. So even today, as an example, right? We morning canvassing, right? Sort of like getting up early, 6, going to traffic locations, talking to voters at bus
Hmm.
stops, or like as they're on their way to work. Then I had a meeting with the
Hmm.
firefighters. So talking to the firefighters union, thinking about their issues, pitching our vision, fielding their questions. Getting on this podcast, right? Then going off to
Hmm.
Jummah and like speaking at Jummah, talking to voters, getting them to get registered, getting them to volunteer. Then later, having sort of time to call donors and like get them interested in what we're building. And then after that, like going to canvassing sessions and like going to talk to more voters. Then maybe having an evening event, and then maybe having an after evening
Hmm.
event. I mean, listen, every day is packed, and
Hmm.
I do think what is inspiring is the kind of way that we're transforming the electorate. And I think
Hmm.
that Mamdani was very successful in doing this. And that's the sort of playbook here, which is like
Hmm.
get people to vote who have never thought about voting before. Get people to vote
Hmm.
who have never been invested in local politics. And
Hmm.
what's the nicest things to me sometimes is like, there's 18-year-olds who literally DM me like on their birthday and say, I just turned 18 and I'm registering to vote for you. Right. And like that's so
Wow.
flattering, right? But even more
Hmm.
flattering is I remember I went to one house and there's a guy who was 32 years old, and I was there because
Hmm.
the sheet had his mom's sort of address, and I talked to him about the
Hmm.
election, and the guy said to me, he was like, "Look, I've never voted before, even in a presidential election, but
Hmm.
I want you to walk me through how to register to vote right now, so I can make sure I vote for you." No. And
Mhm.
that to me is like, you are transforming the way people see themselves in this process.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
yesterday, it's funny. I was out canvassing. We had like a day of action with a lot of
Mhm.
students. There were some students who were like 13, 14 years old, and I was canvassing with them.
Mhm.
And I said to them, I was like, it's it's odd because like for you, you take for granted this idea that there is someone running
Mhm.
who is a Muslim, that who's openly pro
Mhm.
Palestine, who is like, you
Mhm.
know, talking about the issues that you care about. Because when I was
Mhm.
your age, the concept of someone running for
Mhm.
mayor who was
Yeah.
of that sort of like archetype was
Mhm.
impossible. Because at that point we had
Mhm.
never even had a Muslim in office, period, point blank.
Yeah.
Right. So then
Mhm.
I say to them, I was like, like they take for granted the idea that like, oh, you're just off for Eid. Like, yeah, we're just off for Eid,
Yeah.
right? That we have halal
Mhm.
food. Like, of course we have halal food. Or like,
Mhm.
like we have working water fountains, right? Like, yeah, of course, of
Mhm.
course. And like, of
Mhm.
course, from my perspective, that's what I want them to have, right? I want it to be
Yeah.
a default that you are seen,
Mhm.
that you have dignity,
Mhm.
right? That the
Mhm.
people in power see you. But
Mhm.
from my
Mhm.
perspective growing up, that was never the case. Like that when Eid was I
Yeah.
remember my parents, honestly, sometimes when Eid was during the weekday, like during a school day,
Mhm.
maybe we'd go to Eid prayer and just go into school. Or sometimes
Mhm.
like, just skip the Eid prayer. Be like, oh, look, like you have an important exam,
Mhm.
like just go to school.
Yeah.
And so now the fact that like their reality is like, no, not just Muslims are off, but everyone's off on
Mhm.
Eid because we understand the importance of this day is like, to me, it's nice that they have that. And I want to be able to provide more people with that opportunity. And that's what public service allows you to do.
Absolutely. And I think you've blazed a trail that's helped normalize a lot of this, and you and other sort of Muslim leaders who have sort of paved the way for this. And when you were describing your day to day, you were like, "Hey, I'm not sure how inspiring this is," but actually it's very profound and inspiring. And one of the things that I want to double click on here is the fact that you're hustling, but also the fact that, and this is a big Pakistani thing, like ego, like I'm assuming, like when you're canvassing, a lot of people are saying no. There's a lot of rejection. You're talking to donors, they're like, no, who are you? Especially when it comes from within your own community. How do you navigate that? How do for other Pakistani Americans who are young and who want to do what you're doing, how do you develop a thick skin to be okay with rejection and to keep going? Like, what does that take?
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, I've been very lucky, right? So I've been doing this since I was 19, so I'm very used to sort of like the archetype of behaviors that I'm going to get. Um, but on the other hand, like I tell canvassers this too, is like you just get used to rejection therapy. Like I actually smile when people say no. Like, and I think about it like
Mhm.
this, right? It's like when I was working at a law firm, right? And I
Mhm.
only worked for as like a summer, but like the rate for
Mhm.
these attorneys is like $1,000 an hour, right? Like
Mhm.
someone would pay $1,000 for an hour of my time. Now I'm at a
Mhm.
train station and I'm trying to talk to voters and I am giving my time
Mhm.
to say, hey,
Mhm.
please like learn about these policies that can help make the city better. Please learn, learn, learn,
Mhm.
learn, learn. Right? I'm trying to
Mhm.
give them value. And some people literally
Mhm.
like to my face are like, listen, get out of my face. Like don't talk.
Mhm.
And it just makes me
Mhm.
sort of laugh as like, there's all this sort of opportunity that I think exists for people sometimes.
Mhm.
They just don't see it.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
that on the flip side of it, what's really interesting is like it's like a it's like a music artist that's like giving out free CDs,
Mhm.
right? They're like, please, like, just listen
Mhm.
to my music. And then like one day
Mhm.
they blow up, and like to get a ticket to their concert is like $200.
Mhm.
And I know that, and so I understand that like we put in all this work that people don't see, and then like
Mhm.
one day you're the mayor, right?
Mhm.
And people are suddenly like, oh my god, an overnight success. Like, where did he come from? And so, like,
Mhm.
inshallah, we get to that point. But even if we don't get to that point, right, the effort in
Mhm.
and of itself, I think, is worth it because of like what you
Mhm.
are trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. But even with
Mhm.
Zoran, I mean, like Zoran, around like Eid time last year, right? I mean, sorry, this year, earlier
Mhm.
this year, like people were
Mhm.
trying to, organize events for him, and nobody was like,
Mhm.
ah, we want this
Mhm.
guy, right? They were like, bro, like, it's,
Mhm.
what's the point?
Yeah.
And now,
Yeah.
man, if Zoran showed up to your Eid function, the line is going to be out the door to try to get selfies, you
Mhm.
know? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like that sort of concept is very much like what it means to be in these kind of roles, right? Where you're working very hard and people don't see it and people walk past you and people ignore you. And then one day you wake up and like the whole world knows who you are.
Mhm. Mhm. No, absolutely. And I think that that's a very profound thought in terms of being able to put that much sort of into it. Does it ever though, like at a physical or mental health level, like does it get to you, sort of the grind? Like what keeps you going? Is it a belief in a higher power? Like what keeps you going to say, hey, this is hard, but I'm going to keep pushing through?
Well, honestly, Bilal, relative to like other points in my life, it just feels easier, right? Like, I mean, there's this quote that I really like, which is that they say like a healthy man has 100 wishes and a sick man only has one. Um,
Mhm.
but I was a sick man who had more than one wish, to be honest.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I remember those 6 months, right? So I was doing 6 months of chemo. So like I was in chemotherapy at Harvard Law
Mhm.
School in my first year of law school, which like anyone who's been to law
Mhm.
school knows 1L is like the toughest year. And then I was also
Mhm.
managing a school board of 4 to 6 thousand employees in the middle of
Mhm.
the biggest public health crisis in modern times.
Mhm.
So like
Mhm.
those days were crazier than these
Mhm.
days. I mean, those days I had
Mhm.
real responsibility, right? I was like navigating a health crisis that like I didn't understand
Mhm.
myself,
Mhm.
and then also a health crisis within myself, and then also
Mhm.
trying to navigate reading so many cases to
Mhm.
try to get
Mhm.
through classes, right? So
Mhm.
relative to that, right? When you're like, oh, like I've been through that sort of
Mhm.
obstacle, right? And
Mhm.
subhanAllah, in some ways, right? I think God was kind of preparing me for, future endeavors.
Mhm.
Like once you get through that, I mean, like, hey man, how hard is it to like stand on the street and try to talk to people? Like you're like, look, man, like
Yeah.
my life's not really at risk here. Like I don't really have a real responsibility right now, right? I'm not actually in the governance position. And like honestly, I read policy less now than I had to read cases for law school.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. Is there any point though, especially given, you said like, a sick man has one wish, although you said you had more than one. Uh, Especially given that context, there's not a part of you that's like, hey, like I want a wife, like I want like, a normal sort of life, and I want to be able to enjoy it, and I want to be able to savor it, and like is there a part of, or the part of you is like, okay, that'll come later, like right now I want to be of service and I want to make an impact.
Yeah, I mean, look, I do want a wife at some point. My mom actually is
Zoran's taken, so you're our shot.
my mom is very adamant about this. She's like, listen, after this election's over, like you got to get married. But I think about this in a different perspective, which is like, Muhammad Ali has this great quote, and
Hmm.
Muhammad Ali honestly is someone that I look up to all the time when I think about like, what does it mean
Hmm.
to be like a figure who's willing to give
Hmm.
up everything for what you believe in?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and he has a quote where he says, public service is the rent we pay for our time here on earth. And
Hmm.
like, dude, my life was transformed because the city took a shot at me when I was a 20-year-old nobody, like relatively nobody.
Hmm.
Like if you
Hmm.
really think about what does a 20-year-old offer,
Hmm.
right? Like in a competitive election cycle, like
Hmm.
I did not have any level of credentialing that qualified me to
Hmm.
be in charge of what I was in
Hmm.
charge of. It was
Hmm.
only the faith of my community that said, you know what? We need something different and we're willing to
Hmm.
invest in his future
Hmm.
and who he will
Hmm.
become. And
Hmm.
like I owe my city, I think, a great debt to say, look, you
Hmm.
gave me this chance. I want to be there for you.
Mhm,
You had my back when
mhm,
I needed it. Now it's my turn to have your back.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
to me, like, yeah, what is normal, right? Like, what
Mhm,
is a normal life? And in many ways, I think like, life is too short to be boring, right? Like you
mhm,
gotta just like go after the things you want. Um,
mhm,
and I just sort of like think about this of like, look, like, the people of the city gave me this chance. And like, look, if they elect me, they're gonna give me
mhm,
another chance. And they're gonna say, look, like we believe
mhm,
in you to be our champion.
mhm,
They
mhm,
also might not elect me. And in that situation, I'm like,
mhm,
well, you know what? I tried. I put forward my best efforts and like we'll continue to
mhm,
be organizing and doing other things, but like, we'll clearly not be in public service, like in the most direct
mhm,
form of like, being an elected
mhm,
official. So
mhm.
I sort of see this as like an opportunity where I'm presenting the city with a choice. If they take it, great. If they don't take it, that's sort of the cards we're dealt.
That's fascinating. Although I have two feelings. One, I feel like you've already won even before the election. Although as a candidate, you're going to say, "I really want to win the election," and we're all going to work towards sort of making sure that you win. But I think just the fact that you are a part of the conversation and a part of the mix, and I feel like you have such a bright future ahead of you that you're going to keep at it one way or the other. You're going to make an impact on public life. And that's that's the kind of person you are. Like it's just who you are, and it's what you'll do. It's part of your identity. um, I think the other part that I'm just curious about is when you talk to other Muslim leaders, and I don't know if you've had conversations with Ilhan or Rashida or Zoran, what advice do they give you? What advice do they have for you as a Muslim in sort of public life, doing the kind of things that you're doing?
Yeah, so Ilhan actually will be in Jersey City very soon. We're doing a joint rally together, which is a lot of fun. Um,
You need to tell me. I'd love to be there. But
yeah,
yes, keep going.
yeah, September 20th. So next weekend,
Okay.
if you want to come down to
Hmm.
Jersey City. But
Yeah.
look, to me, I think everyone sort of has a different way of like how they deal with the pressures. Because I've
Hmm.
asked Ilhan, this directly. It's like, look, like you
Hmm.
face all this pressure all the time. Like, how do you
Hmm.
navigate it? And
Hmm.
I think it very much is like, this sort of like one belief in something bigger than yourself. And also understanding like
Hmm.
we are, conduits for a cause
Hmm.
and a belief.
Hmm.
And to me, like it's a belief of like, how do we try to make the world a better place? Right. And I
Hmm.
think that if you're coming from that sort of place of reasoning, then like, everything else around you is sort of
Hmm.
secondary, right? Like,
Hmm.
I think about, safety concerns pretty often now,
Hmm.
right? Like this is like a bigger
Hmm.
thing that people have sort of like brought up
Hmm.
and said, okay, like, as you get more and more popular and more people want to talk to
Hmm.
you and like things happen,
Hmm.
like, do you ever worry? And I always say to myself,
Hmm.
like, like, yes, there's an aspect that's like, oh, like
Hmm.
there should be a level of concern that you have. But there's also a part of me that sort of recognizes like the life that I've chosen comes with certain trade-offs.
Hmm.
And like,
Hmm.
to have this megaphone also is
Hmm.
to have a target. And I think that,
Hmm.
we just had people defacing a bunch of our posters, right? Like this just happened this week
Hmm. I
where,
saw that.
yeah,
Hmm.
like, we had people graffitiing our poster and making me look like Hitler,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I think about that not in the context of like, oh, like, these people are trying to cause harm
Hmm.
to me. I think a bit more in the
Hmm.
context of like, these people don't understand that like I am fighting for them too, right? Like
Hmm.
I am trying to improve their lives. And so even if there's people who are like, they want to harm me, I'm always thinking to
Hmm.
myself like, man, I am somebody who wants to improve your lives. And like
Hmm.
the reason I take that thesis
Hmm.
is if you look at the life of the prophet, peace be upon him, right? Like we know
Hmm.
so many stories from his life where,
Hmm.
there were
Hmm.
people who were aggressive, who like literally
Hmm.
wanted to kill him, like,
Hmm.
like daylight
Hmm.
assassination attempts. And the
Hmm.
response was mercy, right? And the response was, from your children, I hope there are people who, believe in the sort of message that we're putting forward.
Hmm.
Um, Now, for me, like the sort of lesson from that is like, I don't necessarily treat people as enemies. I'm like, look, I want to help everybody. And like, even if you are someone who is diametrically opposed to everything that I believe in, I hope there's something I can do to improve your life.
Yeah, that's an incredible sort of thought, and very very inspiring and heart moving in terms of where that comes from. And I hope we can all rise to that level of consciousness. Frankly, um, last two questions. The analogy between you and Zoran, I don't know if it exhausts you at this point or excites you, but like, young Muslim guy, both sides of sort of the river, talking about similar things, bringing a similar kind of coalition. What are your conversations like? Do you guys talk, and like, when you meet him, like, what are your conversations like when you reflect on this?
Yeah, we've met a few times. I don't know that we've directly talked about the sort of mirroring. Like I don't think that's been a
Hmm.
conversation. I think
Hmm.
that that's like become more and more common that I hear that. But
Hmm.
but look, I think we're grounded in a lot of the same principles, right? In terms of like,
Hmm.
fighting for working class people, thinking
Hmm.
about like, how do we increase the social safety net for people? The scale of stuff is just
Hmm.
very different, right? I mean, like New York City is 9
Hmm.
million people. We're a city of
Hmm.
300,000, right? And so like
Hmm.
what we're problems that we're dealing with and our capacity to deal with them are different than
Hmm.
what Zoran is able to do. And what I love about
Hmm.
what he does is like the way he dreams. is so big.
Mhm.
And I think that's a part of, being a New Yorker, is he's allowed to like have those dreams of like, yeah,
Mhm.
we have all this money and this wealth that's available. Versus for me, I mean,
Mhm.
it's very much about like, okay, like I want to make sure New Jersey and Jersey City specifically has its own identity, right? It's like I feel like
Mhm.
so often New Jersey sort of gets looked over, right? That there's like, like
Mhm.
here's New York City and here's Philadelphia, and like to
Mhm.
get between them, you got to go through Jersey. But I think New Jersey has its own sort of like
Mhm.
personality, and I think that
Mhm.
Jersey people from Jersey, and I think this is
Mhm.
kind of universal. If you meet someone from New Jersey, they love New Jersey. Like we are very proud
I
of
love
being from
Jersey.
our state. Like we are extremely proud of being from New Jersey.
Mhm.
And I think like
Mhm.
I want to make sure that comes across to people as like that. Like I am proud of being from New Jersey. I don't want to be a New Yorker, right? Like my
Mhm.
dream is not to be one day in Manhattan, right? And like, oh, like I made
Mhm.
it. I think I've made it right here.
Yeah.
Like I think this is the place
Mhm.
that I call home. But I think
Mhm.
in sort of that comparison, I think there's a lot of similarities, right? Like especially the people we're
Mhm.
running against. I mean, that part of the story is even more
Mhm.
fascinating because those guys lined up their elections way before we thought about
Mhm.
ours, right? Like
Mhm.
the former disgraced governor of New Jersey and the former disgraced governor of New York for years have probably
Mhm.
been plotting and saying, you know what's a great thing for me to do is like run for mayor of this town that I'm not from, and like sort
Mhm.
of like expect the voters to give them the vote.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but look, I think it's flattering in a lot of ways because I've seen
Mhm.
who Zoran has become and the ways that Zoran is
Mhm.
perceived and the way that he's inspired so many
Mhm.
people in our community. Um, but I also
Mhm.
think it's important to emphasize the differences and how we sort of like view the world a little bit, right? In terms of like how I think about
Mhm.
policy, how he thinks about policy, and our life experiences, I think, are very different as well in terms of like how
Mhm.
he's grown up, how I've grown up.
Mhm. Yeah. On that point about growing up, I think you come from a working class background. When your parents moved here, how does that impact? It's clear how it impacts your policies, but how does it impact your worldview in terms of there's this idea of a model minority and immigrants just sort of trying to be doctors and engineers versus a sort of go into a life of public service. Like, how does the working class aspect shape your worldview in terms of how you operate and how you see the world?
Yeah. So when I was an undergrad, I was pre med. Um,
Hmm.
so I was supposed to go to medical school, and
Almost there.
almost there, almost there. My mom, even when I got into Harvard, was like, "Oh, like I heard there's a medical school across the river. Like you can still do it." And I'll say, look, I'm very grateful to so many Pakistanis who have become
Hmm.
doctors or in healthcare,
Hmm.
right? Like the pharmacists, the
Hmm.
doctors in our community. I mean, is
Hmm.
plentiful,
Hmm.
and I think is a great
Hmm.
foundation for us because honestly, when I
Hmm.
when I go to people and like I say that I'm Pakistani, the number
Hmm.
one like thing that we think about remember about Pakistanis is like, oh, my doctor's Pakistani, or like my pharmacist is
Hmm.
Pakistani, right? And so I'm so
Hmm.
grateful to the people who are in healthcare, who are sort of like doing those
Hmm.
services. But I think that that sort of like working class mentality that my parents had, I had to sort of say to myself like, when I think about impact, like I don't want
Hmm.
to take away from what doctors do, right? Like it's incredible to have the
Hmm.
power to save somebody's life. But
Hmm.
like doctors are sort of at the bottom end of the stream. The problems that cause people to
Hmm.
get sick are happening so much
Hmm.
earlier. And so what
Hmm.
started to actually pivot me towards policy is like I was studying to be a doctor and I started to study public health. And
Hmm.
public health people will always tell you this, which is like if you look at the improvements in people's lives,
Hmm.
public health has done more to improve like our
Hmm.
lifespan than any form of
Hmm.
like modern medication, right?
Hmm.
And so as I started thinking about public health, I started thinking about policy and I started thinking about lawmaking and I
Hmm.
started to think about education and I started to be like, man, like
Hmm.
my interests are so varied. Like what can I do
Hmm.
that I can touch everything,
Hmm.
right? And sort of like absorb
Hmm.
the best practices of what's
Hmm.
happening across the world. And I realized that
Hmm.
politics was sort of this natural sort of ecosystem for me where I could
Hmm.
talk about healthcare and policy and education and all of these different things and have people say, yeah,
Hmm.
like, you know what, you can be a thought leader on all of this. And you can
Hmm.
like, collaborate with people who are experts in all these fields. Because, the
Hmm.
other thing I think my parents really gifted me with was this love of learning,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Hmm.
honestly, if I go back to school, I probably would. It's just that I think that
Hmm.
we've probably exhausted the amount of education that I can get. But I would love to go back to
Hmm.
school. I love the idea of learning. I love talking to experts in their fields and sort of understanding how the world works from their point of view because I think so many different aspects and silos of the world are connected. And I love the
Hmm.
idea of being able to say, okay, how do we connect public health and
Hmm.
education and housing? And Zoran does this really well in his campaign as well. Is like we talk about this idea of like, when we talk about healthcare, when we talk about
Hmm.
education, like we need to talk about housing, right? Like what good are good
Hmm.
schools if you can't afford to live in the city to like go to those schools,
Yeah.
right? And like when we talk about food injustice, right? Like we cancel student
Hmm.
lunch debt for students in Jersey City. It's like if a kid doesn't have the ability to eat their lunch,
Hmm.
like they're going to be hungry all day, right? And like we
Yeah.
actually fought to have a vision program to give kids glasses because we were like, if they can't see the board, how do you expect them to possibly learn what's happening in the classroom?
I agree completely. I know you have a hard stop coming, so I maybe the last thing is, if you would like to use, to speak to our audience, and either sort of, make a case for why they should donate to your campaign, or if they're living in Jersey City, why they should be voting for you. I want to give you sort of another last 2 to 3 minutes to just sort of make your case and to be able to speak to the audience directly from the heart.
Sure. Look, I think that this campaign is very much rooted in building a Jersey City that works for everybody, right? And I think what that means is, fighting to have affordable housing, right? And fighting to increase the amount of housing that exists so that everyone that wants to live in Jersey City can afford to live there. It means building a transportation system where we have a fast and free city run bus system that connects people all across the city to build one city instead of these different neighborhoods. It's about a campaign of integrity where we are the only campaign, we don't take any money from city contractors or city vendors. So in many other states there's pay to play laws that ban people who get city
Hmm.
contracts from donating to politicians, but in this state we've
Hmm.
gotten rid of those laws. And so we
Hmm.
are the only campaign that has stood firmly and said, look, if you are a city contractor
Hmm.
or city vendor, we do not want your money because we want to maintain
Hmm.
our independence. This is a
Hmm.
campaign that's rooted on providing dignity to working people, right? Whether that's
Hmm.
banning broker fees, banning application fees, allowing
Hmm.
people to have dignity in their day to day lives. And so, if that's the kind of vision that you believe in, if that's the kind of politics that you want to embrace, this is the kind of campaign that you should contribute towards. I will say one more difference between me and Zoran is Zoran has said he doesn't need any more of your money, and we still do. So that's big for us. And I think to the voters in Jersey City, I mean, we look forward to meeting you and talking to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Musab, for sharing this. You are such an inspiration, and we hope, we once sort of, you're in office. Inshallah, we hope to have you back on the podcast because I think I'm very genuine and sincere when I say that I want to use this podcast to create 100 more Mussab Alis, because are the beginning of this revolution, not the end of it, and we're at the beginning of this journey, and we need many, many more like you. And there's so much that we can learn from you. So we hope we can have you again and again and again to talk about your journey at different stages and continue to learn from you, and for you to be able to continue to inspire many more in the Pakistani American community.
Thank you for having me, Bilal. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.